I'm recording this on April Fool's Day 2025, and I get extra paranoid about stuff that's released on April Fool's Day for the obvious reason that there's always that possibility that someone's trying to make a joke out of whatever they're putting out there. So, what are we talking about here? Well, the John F. Kennedy declassified files were released in large amount recently. You can see these dates here. You can't see the whole screen, but this can be found at archives.gov. You just Google it. It'll be like the third result. There's apparently over 80,000 entries here. That's a lot of stuff. I mean, imagine how long it would take to look through all that. And I won't spend a lot of time looking at it, but if you just click on one thing here, what do you got here? Discussion between member senior division concerning Oswald's stay in Helsinki. So there you go, right there. Just the very first thing I clicked on. You're getting information about Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who supposedly killed Kennedy, according to the Warren Commission. And he's spending time in Helsinki. What's he doing there? Who is this guy? Anyhow, that's something you can look at. Anna Paulina Luna is the chairwoman of this hearing here, and the director, Oliver Stone, is also in attendance, which is interesting. He's a filmmaker. He made the movie The Doors, Born on the 4th of July, Platoon, and a movie called JFK, and some kind of follow-up as well. I still haven't seen JFK, but I've been told for many years that I have to see it, that it's an interesting film. I believe Bill Cooper, a guy I mentioned a lot here, I believe he mentioned that movie too a couple times. Anyway, Anna Paulina Luna's opening statement here is basically she's highlighting the lack of transparency. So I think what she's trying to do here, more than anything, is bring trust back to the government and the CIA and the FBI, because let's face it, most of us don't trust them, right? I mean, you really shouldn't. They haven't behaved so well. And the JFK assassination is a perfect example. So she doesn't go much out on a limb in her opening statement. She just says this is about transparency. And I'm just going to talk about some of what I thought were the highlights of this hearing, because sometimes these can be long and boring. And although Oliver Stone is sort of the star of this hearing here, this guy here, Mr. James Morley, an author who's written about JFK and has been studying the assassination for over 30 years, he's the one that seems the most fired up. You can kind of feel the intensity of his emotion regarding all this information. And what I really like about this guy is that he does say that he's a left-leaning liberal, but he makes several attempts here to rise above the partisan politics, which we'll see in a minute, which I really respect about him. Because when you're trying to solve a case, you have to be very objective. So what he's holding here is what he seems to believe is one of the most significant new releases from these recent JFK assassination files, which is the CIA file on Lee Harvey Oswald before he shot Kennedy, of which he says that 3 CIA representatives lied about. And James Jesus Angleton is the first guy he names, American CIA officer, and he's the one who apparently put together that report that he's holding in his hand that he says is 198 pages. It pertains to time Oswald spent in the Soviet Union, which was like 6 years. And if you know anything about this case, there's lots of commentary about whether Oswald was some kind of double agent, and they say he spoke Russian as well. The other man he mentions is George Ioannidis, another Central Intelligence Agency officer who James says lied under oath about his knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald. And then, of course, Richard Helms, that's a name I've heard over the years. And Mr. Morley goes on to say that he believes that the CIA was, in so many words, he says the CIA was involved in the murder of John F. Kennedy, either by complacency, by being like sloppy, or being directly involved somehow. And at the end of his opening statement, Mr. Morley suggests that we get representatives from the CIA today and get them on the record, like talk, like what happened here. Explain yourselves. Are you going to apologize about this? Are you going to talk to us? Cop to this. Let's get some accountability here. And I support that sentiment strongly. Now, I have some mixed feelings about Oliver Stone's performance here, and I say performance because he's obviously been in the movie business for a long time. He's one of the biggest names out there. And when he talks, it's almost like he's laying it on too thick, like he's overacting. If you watch a lot of old Charlton Heston movies or, William Shatner in Star Trek, that's what I'm talking about. Like he just overacts and overemphasizes sometimes. And I'm not even joking. I'm not going to play it for you. You can go watch it if you want. But I will say what he's saying, the words he's saying are great. I'm really behind what he's saying here. Anyway, I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about how Oliver Stone sounded. You can go watch it for yourself. But at the end of the day, he did say some pretty interesting stuff. I didn't know that his film, JFK, resulted in some type of congressional hearing. And in 1992, they established the JFK Records Act, which is, I guess, where the declassification of these files or the attempt to do so began. I don't trust anyone in the movie business. So, this could very well have been contrived, as a sort of long-term reveal made to look organic. But whatever the case, I think it's true enough that this JFK Records Act started then for whatever reasons. But Oliver Stone goes on to explain that as of 1998, like 6 years after the records were supposed to be declassified, the CIA was still blocking it. They were basically saying, "Oh, we'll get back to you," and stonewalling, and they just, it's like they think they're above the law. They don't have to answer to the people. And he ends with a pretty interesting quote, allegedly attributed to James Angleton, who Mr. Morley mentioned earlier, that apparently towards the end of his life, he was kind of talking bad about Dulles and other individuals involved with the JFK assassination narrative. And he basically said, they're probably all going to hell, and I guess I will see them soon. This James Angleton guy must have been a pretty corrupt individual. Now, this guy here, Mr. DiEugenio, is apparently another expert, 30-plus year studier of the JFK assassination, very respected guy, I guess. And, it's really hard for me to trust any of these people because of my basic belief that, well, if you're here and you're given this platform, then there must be something crooked about you. But nonetheless, I'm trying to be objective, and I'm just taking what these people are saying and trying to weigh it objectively. And he does say some very interesting things. He references the JFK Records Act, which I mentioned earlier, that was, I guess, the result of Oliver Stone's movie in 1992. But DiEugenio refers to it as the JFK Records Act of 2017. And this jogged my memory a little. I believe the way it worked was when the JFK Records Act was first initiated in 1992, it was to be released by 2017. I know that might sound a little odd, but that's actually not surprising, when you consider how the bureaucracy of all this works and how long it takes everything to happen. So anyway, 2017 rolls around, and Trump was going to release everything back then, but he was advised not to by someone. And I've heard this story that Trump was advised not to release everything, so he ended up releasing some of it in 2017. Mr. DiEugenio goes on to state that Biden was about the same or worse in terms of releasing stuff. So I don't know that anything was released under Biden. But the thing is, with something as huge as the JFK assassination plot being revealed, or the Epstein, client list, or any of these huge, conspiracies, real conspiracy things that we know where there's conspiracy. I have this belief that there's I don't know what to call it, the domino theory. I have this belief that a lot of these conspiracies, or most of the really big ones, they're all kind of connected. And I think when a world leader has the opportunity to let the people know about something like this, they have to consider the implications of what they're doing and how it could change society, or how it could fall flat on its face and have no effect, which would be completely detrimental, because when will you get another chance to reveal something like that? So I just think that there's a lot of things to be weighed, and timing is extremely important. And when you're dealing with as much propaganda that we're swimming in, and you've got so many people just brainwashed and not believing how much corruption is in the government, it's very difficult to get accountability, because people they believe everything the media says. So if the media just propagandizes them and says, oh no, that's bullshit, so-and-so isn't really guilty, they just believe it. Mr. DiEugenio goes on to say that before the Warren Commission report came out, before that, he's saying one statistic is that 75% of the public believed what the government said. And by the 1990s, it was down to 17%. And he says that the biggest drop statistically in the public's faith in the government was the same year that the Warren Commission it was issued. So he goes on to say that, and I didn't know this, John F. Kennedy thought he was lied to about the Bay of Pigs by the CIA. So John F. Kennedy started looking into the CIA, and then he employed this guy, Schlesinger, who composed something called the Schlesinger Memo, which was to do a top-down investigation of the CIA. And the CIA ended up cutting most of it, or a lot of it, and not letting it get out to the public. And, he talks about the arrogance of the CIA and how they're just like above the law. So I think that's kind of like at the heart of this entire thing. It begins to sound like the CIA just does whatever they want, even though they're supposed to be working for us, because our taxpayer dollars fund them. So I think that's an important point to keep revisiting. And finally, this Mr. John Davison guy here, he's all about the legal stuff related to the release. And he spends most of his time here. He's very brief and to the point, but he spends most of his time talking about the potential risks of releasing this information irresponsibly. And he mainly focuses on the fact that I guess some people's social security numbers were released in some of these files. And he goes the extra step to criticize this and says that, Trump's rushed release of all of this without redacting certain people's social security numbers is outrageous, incompetent, almost criminal. And he goes on to continue to talk about how terrible that is. And it comes up again later in the hearing. So, I mean, on its face, he seems to have a point. I mean, I that does seem pretty bad if you're releasing people's social security numbers, even if it was whatever, over 60 years ago. But the other side of the coin here is this can be used as a way to justify just about anything you want to redact in the report. In other words, there can be pages of redactions that you don't know what's there, and the CIA can simply say, and they've done this plenty of times, they could just say, oh yeah, we're trying to protect the privacy of people and, national security and all this. So, I mean, this guy is the type of lawyer that will come out there and he'll say things like this, and he'll sound very convincing, and he'll present it in a very convincing way, but he might very well be protecting a criminal, So this guy just kind of comes off as very robotic and kind of like that kind of lawyer that, you better watch out, because he's just going to say what he needs to say to win the case. That's just how I feel. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know his history. He does also bring up the problem of inadequately funded, government agencies like public records offices, which, again, on the surface, that sounds like a fair, thing to bring up at this juncture. But at the same time, it cannot be ignored that Doge, they're cutting funds all over the place, And their main goal is to cut waste and fraud, of which they found a whole lot. And even my dad, I heard him repeating the headlines saying, oh, they're trying to get rid of Social Security. That's not true. He's going off of the headlines. The headlines are trying to say, they're trying to freak you out, make you think, oh yeah, they're cutting everything. They're cutting money going to people that are supposedly over 150 years old. They're not cutting basic services. So I mean, I'm just bringing that up to show that I think they always plant some guy in one of these hearings. They always plant one guy who's going to agree with the point of view that's going to try to subvert the whole thing. And I'll show you what I'm talking about as this goes. But as far as why Trump did rush to release this, and it's a funny word, rush. I mean, it was supposed to all come out in 2017, right? They had plenty of time to redact anything they wanted to redact. And here's Anna Paulina Luna holding up a document supposedly from one of the recently released documents where CIA agents are rejecting the lone gunman theory, which is kind of a big deal because all these years we've been told, oh, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and was the only guy involved, and he's the one who killed Kennedy. Because Lee Harvey Oswald, famously stated he was being railroaded and he was murdered too. So he wasn't even really able to go to trial to defend himself. So that's a pretty big deal right there. I should also mention that it was spoken about earlier of some of these CIA individuals creating propaganda that Oswald was working with Castro or trying to promote Castro or something like that. So Anna Paulina Luna asks Oliver Stone about something to do with witnesses who saw the body of JFK. And according to Oliver Stone, there are still 40 people living today who witnessed a large gaping wound in the back of JFK's head, indicating a shot from the front. In other words, the big blowout in the back of the head indicates that a bullet went in through the front and came out through the back. And this actually corresponds to something that I heard William Bill Cooper say many years ago. He showed a video where he claims the driver of the car, William Greer, actually shot JFK. And he shows this by, he shows a film during his lecture, a really good copy of the Zapruder film, which apparently there's inferior versions that have been circulated, but in his presentation, he claims that he had a very good copy of it and he shows it on a TV. And if you look really closely right here, you can see what looks like a gun, and that's the exact same footage that I remember from the video that Bill Cooper showed, but this is actually a clearer version. So this is easy to find if you look at Google, but look at that. He turns around, boom. And here we are in a congressional hearing, and Oliver Stone's just straight up not saying that the driver shot him, but I mean, saying that it sounds like witnesses saw evidence that he was shot in the front, which Lee Harvey Oswald could not have done from where he was standing, where he was allegedly standing at the time he allegedly shot JFK. Okay, now this guy, Mr. Garcia, asks James Morley a question, and the first thing he asks him is, do you think Lee Harvey Oswald fired the shots? And they get into this like wordplay where he's trying to get James Morley to answer the way he wants him to answer. He wants him to say yes or no. If you watch a lot of these congressional hearings, they always say yes or no. Is this blah 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 or blah blah blah? And they'll present the question in a way that sort of traps the person who's being asked into saying yes or no, and it sort of traps them into saying something they're not really trying to say, but what the person asking the question wants it to sound like. And so this guy basically, he doesn't seem to really want to get to the bottom really of anything. He just wants to get his soundbite. He goes on to say, so you've said that there is no direct evidence as of today that the CIA committed the assassination. And then James Morley kind of responds like, Well, no, I didn't say exactly that. He says that there is a lot of evidence that points towards the CIA's involvement. But, when you're working against a bureaucracy that doesn't want to give you information and is just constantly trying to block you the whole way, it's very difficult to have like a smoking gun, which is a phrase that comes up a lot in this hearing. But, this guy's job seems to be to remind the people watching, you and me, like, there's no smoking gun here. Oh yeah, this guy lied and that guy lied and this CIA get lied, but they're not. How do we really know they're covering something up just because they lied? And how do we really know that what they're covering up is their own involvement? How do we really know that? Well, okay, how do you know that the kid really stole the cookie from the jar, even though the kid was the only one home and the jar was open when he got home and there was a cookie missing? How do you really know? You didn't see the kid do it. This is the game they play. They play these word games and they just want to get a soundbite. And so he states, this guy, Mr. Garcia, states at James Morley, you have no direct evidence that the CIA committed the assassination. You see, he keeps saying that line, you have no, and he wants to get him to say yes so that later on, when people forget the context and they forget what's going on in the situation, he can mention later in a future hearing, he can go, oh, well, James Morley even agreed. He said yes when I said you have no direct evidence of CIA, whatever. And then you read an article in the news and the headline is, James Morley agrees there's no direct evidence of blah, 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 and it goes on from there. So this guy, I believe, is part of the cover-up. He's here to try and cover it up. And then he starts getting into, well, we can't just be releasing stuff and releasing people's personal information. And then he hands it off to Mr. Davison, who, if you remember, all he talks about in the very beginning is like, oh, well, they rashly and recklessly released Social Security numbers. I can't believe they did it. And so, Garcia hands it off to him to sort of go on that tangent again, even though he already said it. So they keep making this same point because these guys are coordinating with each other to try and subvert the revealing of the CIA's culpability. I believe that is their job. That's why they're here, which is very frustrating because it starts feeling like the church hearings. Like, I've mentioned the church hearings before where they talked about MK Ultra, and they seem to be very serious and they're very concerned and they feel very bad about it all. But in the end, there's no accountability. It's like a show. It's a show for the public. Like, oh, well, we did this. We acknowledged it. Well, where's the accountability? Who's going to get arrested? Nobody. Now, this woman, Mrs. Luna, not to be confused with Anna Paulina Luna, I guess, unless the name tag is switched, I don't know. Anyway, this woman, I assume, is Republican, and look how she has the crosses for necklaces. So you're looking at her and you're thinking, oh, she's Republican, she's Christian, and she kind of goes on a monologue here. And she's the first one to really introduce the overt political, I guess you might say partisan aspect to this hearing, where she starts talking about Trump and how, we need to, thank him basically for his transparency and allowing this stuff to be released. She makes a comparison between the CIA and the government agencies in JFK's day and kind of makes the argument that it's still happening. And then she cites the 51 intelligence leaders that signed a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was fake, which later was finally admitted to be not fake. The cover-up of Biden's cognitive decline, the cover-up of the origins of COVID. I mean, a lot of what she's saying I think is valid. But whether or not you think it's valid, I'm asking you to step back and look at what she's doing, okay? She's introducing a partisan aspect that is leaning to the side of Trump. I think what she's actually doing here, I think she's a fake. I think she's an actor. I think she's actually trying to subvert transparency by doing this. She's acting out a stereotype to beclown the right and to basically invalidate it by beclowning it on purpose, but pretending like she isn't. And she sort of finishes her monologue by finally asking a question to Mr. Morley, and he says, who do you think fired the shot? which is really a different way of asking the same question that Mr. Garcia asked earlier, where he said, you said you have no direct evidence as of today that the CIA committed the assassination. I mean, it's not the same question, but she's sort of establishing that you don't know who fired the shot. She's focusing on that. And again, this is a soundbite that can be used later when it's taken out of context. A news headline can say, Morley doesn't know who fired the shot. What kind of expert is he? But he does state flatly that he thinks that the CIA and the Pentagon were probably involved with the murder of JFK. Miss Luna then asks Mr. Davison, who I believe is a plant here, to try and make sure the focus is on, they shouldn't have rashly released this, this file after 60 plus years and just shove those social security numbers out there. That's all he wants to talk about this whole time. She asks him, how do we make the government more transparent with Congress? So I think this was rehearsed. She's handing him off a question, and this is how he answers, to provide resources to agencies to process public records requests in a timely fashion. And he goes on from there. Okay, so notice what he's saying here. He's saying that the government needs more resources. What does that mean? Money. Okay, and again, as I said earlier, DOJ is cutting funding on a lot of these organizations, and the way that the establishment is choosing to attack this, to criticize these actions, is by going, they want to cut, the Department of Education. They want to cut Social Security. They want to, prevent children from getting, disabled children from getting the help they need, and all this. And these are all exaggerations and lies, because yes, the funding is being cut, but they're not cutting vital services. They're cutting waste. Okay, so this is an act. Okay, this is coordinated. What's going on here? All the dialogue. It's basically a high form of propaganda, I would say. And Mr. Davison goes on to say what sounds like a rehearsed line. He mentions Trump's hateful campaign against trans individuals. I mean, look at this guy. I mean, does he look like he grew up in a liberal city, hanging out with, trans people and having a beer with them? I mean, maybe. I could be wrong. Maybe he is. But I don't buy it. I think this guy's a fake. I think he's just saying that because he's being paid to present a certain angle. Now, Mr. Krishnamurthy begins by saying that, why are we emphasizing all these conspiracies and all this CIA stuff? This is detracting from the important aspects of JFK's life. And then he starts launching into this thing about how JFK wrote a letter to Jackie Robinson about his role in the civil rights movement. So he brings this whole thing to race. He starts talking about race. And I don't think a coincidence that, number one, he has an Indian name, and number two, there's a black woman sitting right behind him, and there's actually a black woman sitting right next to him too. I'm telling you, they do this on purpose for visual aspect, because he's going into race here, and he's trying to make a statement, and what he's going to do is, surprise, he's going to try and brand Trump a racist. That's not the topic here. The topic here is not whether Trump is a racist or not. The topic is JFK's assassination, and he's taking it into a completely different direction because he's a partisan, he has a partisan political angle. He doesn't care about why JFK was assassinated. He doesn't care about bringing accountability to the CIA. His job is to attack Trump in this context. And then he goes on to say, you, Mr. DiEugenio, one of the guys testifying here, he says, you said online on Twitter or something like that this is really sick that Trump did that. That's what you said, right? And then DiEugenio says, he laughs and he goes, I did? Did I say that? I don't recall saying that. So, but then he goes on to say, well, maybe I did, but I don't remember it. So it's just funny that this guy, Krishnamurthy, basically he's trying to establish a consensus that, we all hate Trump here. And Mr. DiEugenio ends up finally just saying, maybe I said it, maybe I didn't. And he just sort of laughs it off. He seems more entertained by it, by the statement than anything.
Mr. Morley, you said that JFK, quote, took great risks on behalf of all Americans in resisting the forces of militarism and racism. Yes. Donald Trump, on the other hand, recently eliminated, believe it or not, the prohibition on federal contractors using or maintaining racial.
And then he kind of goes and puts a question to Morley along the same lines. And he basically compares Trump to JFK. And if now look at his face, okay? He's a lefty, he's a liberal, but he's like, come on, man, we're here to talk about JFK. Why do you have to engage in these partisan politics? He knows what the guy's doing. He knows that Krishnamurti wants him to be like, yeah, I hate Trump, yeah. And I think he has a lot of class because the way he replies is, I was invited here to comment on the JFK files. I don't want to make a partisan political issue of it. He's absolutely right. And then he goes on to, pull up this picture of Oliver Stone. He keeps trying to bring this lighthearted, oh, here he is in Vietnam. Ha ha ha. Isn't that funny? Let's revisit this moment. It's like, that's not what we're talking about. But he's doing this so to wind it up and make some weird point to attack Trump yet again, to promote the idea that the release of these documents is dangerous. And he tries to make this point by talking about how you can get ambushed in a situation like this. And the wording is kind of hard to follow. And even Oliver Stone is confused. In fact, Oliver Stone says, I'm a little confused. Are you talking about friendly fire? So basically, Mr. Krishnamurthy's point falls flat because he's trying too hard, And Oliver Stone's kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. He literally didn't even understand what he was trying to say. So obviously he didn't fall into and say what he was expected to say by Mr. Krishnamurthy, who just wanted to get his soundbite and get his yes to whatever point he was trying to make, attacking the release of these files. Now, Miss Lee starts out with a brief introduction, making it sound like she thinks that the transparency going on here is great, but then immediately spends the rest of her time focusing completely on the criticism of releasing all these documents with the Social Security numbers and personal information, jeopardizing the safety of personnel and threats to personnel. And I haven't heard of any of these threats to people as a result of their Social Security numbers being in these files. I'm not saying that that's not happening, that this isn't a problem. That's not what I'm saying. But when you look at how it seems that certain individuals on this panel of certain political leanings that you can look up, they're all unanimously just attacking on this one point, which is kind of weird. You can't, on one hand, be like, yeah, this is great transparency for the people, but then on the other hand, spend most of your time attacking the decision to do it and picking apart why it was done badly. She states that the rollout of the files has caused collateral damage just to score Trump political points by rushing the release and forcing people to get new Social Security numbers. Now, these files weren't really rushed. I mean, I guess they were rushed in terms of once the decision was made to finally put them out, but it's debatable when you consider the fact that the process of releasing these files goes back to 1992. So I mean, I don't know. It just feels like this point is just being exaggerated purposefully to just have an excuse to criticize the way it was released. And then she hands it off to Mr. Davison, who again basically restates what she just says, but does it in a real I'm a professional white guy, attorney, law, legal guy, and I'm gonna just restate what she said, but do it in a real legalese, uptight white guy kind of way. It's like a tag team in a wrestling match, basically. It would be interesting to get the other side, the explanation as to how many people, who those people were, and why their social security numbers were included in there, and who made that decision. That's the part of this argument that we don't have the answer to. So there's two sides to every argument, and this may very well be a valid criticism. But I mean, again, the way they're just driving it home, they're making it the only issue. When this is supposed to be about transparency mainly, and getting answers about the JFK assassination, because the CIA lied. That's the bigger issue, is that the CIA lied to the people and has been lying and is still lying to this day. What else are they doing? That's the real issue. But that's not what they want to talk about. And Mr. Davison finishes off by saying that this terrible release of personal information could have been avoided by simply going through the, quote, ordinary process. Well, the ordinary process is why this has taken 50, 60 years to come out. You're just seeing how lawyers can twist language around to mean almost anything they want to suit any narrative they want. Next up is Lauren Boebert. Now, not many of you may have heard of her, but I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Marjorie Taylor Greene, MTG. And she kind of sort of plays the clown, stereotype of the quote, far right. And I've discussed her before, and how basically I think her job, and I think probably Boebert's as well, is to misrepresent the right and to beclown the right in order to make them look bad and to enforce negative stereotypes the media wants to promote about the right. Now, I don't know that for sure, but one example right here, Boebert starts talking to Oliver Stone, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you wrote a book about how LBJ had Kennedy killed," and the thing is, she's got the wrong Stone. Roger Stone is the one who wrote that book about, or a couple books I think about LBJ, a friend of Trump's, someone who was blasted in the media, someone who the media told you, oh, you've got to hate this guy, he's Trump's friend. So Lauren Boebert is, I think, intentionally confusing Oliver Stone in front of everyone to beclown herself and the right, because I think that's her job. Now, I could be wrong. She could have really just got it wrong, but if she did, that was a major bimbo blonde moment. Anyway, Oliver Stone reacts very confused for obvious reasons, and what he says in this moment, he says that Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, was fired by Kennedy. And then after Kennedy was assassinated, Dulles was put in charge of the Warren Commission. So he points out that this seems to be evidence of Lyndon B. Johnson's incompetence or involvement. So I don't think anyone here is saying that Lyndon B. Johnson's involvement is off the table. Everyone is just not explicitly pointing to it. And it just seems like Lauren Boebert was trying to project that onto Oliver Stone to confuse things and sort of make a joke out of everything. She kind of nervously laughs. And I noticed Anna Paulina Luna does a little bit of this ditzy laughing thing. And that could be because she's green, because she hasn't been in politics super long. It could be because she's deliberately trying to beclown the role that she's playing. But who knows? Mr. D. Eugenio then starts talking about Commission Exhibit 399. I'd never heard of this, but if you've studied the JFK files a lot and you study the conspiracy, you probably know about Commission Exhibit 399, which is basically a bullet that was supposedly involved in the shooting, was handed off to Secret Service and then to the CIA, and by the time it got to its final destination, it didn't resemble the original bullet according to the guy who submitted it to the Secret Service, and there's no chain of custody which can be traced. Who watched it? Where did they get it? Who gave it to who? Where is it now? What happened to it? All that. That's chain of custody. When there's no chain of custody, you don't really know how anything got where it got, and you don't know how valid that piece of evidence is. You have to be able to trace it from the scene of the crime to the evidence box. And if you can't do that, or you can't explain that to the people, that's a lack of transparency. So that's a big point about Commission Exhibit 399 that keeps coming up here as I translate it. Jasmine Crockett. So she does the same thing a lot of the other representatives were doing. She starts out going, while I think it's great that we're trying to talk about transparency here, Republicans are trying to relitigate whether the CIA lied about JFK, but they're not doing anything about the CIA lying 6 days ago. And then she starts going on about Signalgate. Now, Signalgate is a very uninteresting topic that was all in the news a few days ago. Basically, there's this app called Signal that people like Jasmine Crockett and people in the Secret Service and all kinds of people in government use, which is some kind of encrypted, a way to communicate quickly that's secure, but that they're not supposed to discuss classified information on. And some reporter from The Atlantic was somehow inadvertently invited into the chat, and then it was public in The Atlantic. And so they had to like absolutely exaggerate this as some kind of security breach. All they've been doing is they don't want to let this go. Like, damn it, there was classified information discussed. Here's what classified information is. Here's what you said. It was classified. It was classified. And nobody really cares, but they keep harping on it. And that's what her whole, whatever, 5-minute interrogation opportunity is about. It's not about transparency. It's about attacking her political opponents. And if you think this is just my opinion, and so she ties this up and goes, Mr. Morley, if this is the way that the Department of Justice handled the JFK files, would you be able to do what you did or something to that effect? And remember, Mr. Morley is an out liberal. He says, I'm a liberal, I'm on the left. And the first thing he says to her is, I didn't come here to engage in a debate about partisan politics. In other words, he's calling her out. He's saying, look, I see you have a political angle here. And even though I'm a Democrat like you, I don't agree with the fact that you're making this all about partisan politics. He calls her out right off the bat. Morley then, after making his short point, hands the rest of his time off to Oliver Stone, who again seems a little confused. When these people engage in partisan politics and they try to spin a question at Oliver Stone to sort of pull the words out of his mouth that they want him to say, I give Oliver Stone credit. As kind of almost dopey and elderly as he comes off, he gets very confused when they do this, and I think that's because he smells their bullshit. And he basically says, yeah, of course, I wouldn't have been able to make my movie had the records been destroyed. But Jasmine Crockett was trying to sort of tie that into Signalgate by saying like, oh yeah, they destroyed the Signal chat. They destroyed the evidence. What if they destroyed the evidence in the JFK case, which of course they must have destroyed a lot of it, I'm sure. So she tries to spin that question to get Oliver Stone to be like, yeah, that's just like what Trump just did a week ago, I'm not here to spin this into some sort of like they're using this to attack Trump thing. I'm not trying to spin that into it. That's just what it is on a certain level. Mr. Burleson brings up several new documents that came out of the recent classifications. You might hear in the news, oh, there's nothing revealed here. In fact, I forgot to mention that Jasmine Crockett stated something to the effect of, nothing is proven that linking the CIA to the assassination or the involvement of them in the JFK assassination. You got to wonder why certain individuals on this panel, they keep repeating these same phrases. There is no proof the CIA is involved. Again, yeah, there's no actual proof that, your kid ate the cookie out of the cookie jar, but, it was full when you left the house. And then when you came back, the kid had, chocolate on his face. There was a cookie missing and the lid was off. Okay, you could get really technical and be like, yeah, well, nobody saw it. There's no camera footage. So therefore there's no direct proof. But I mean, you can't say there isn't any evidence, and you can't say that it isn't completely obvious what he did. You see, but you can go in a courtroom and you can use fancy legal talk, and you can repeatedly say there's no direct proof, and sometimes win a case that way. And this is the kind of shit that lawyers do, and this is why they're so evil, because they can literally keep repeating there's no proof and find a way to win a case where there's lots of evidence showing that, the party is guilty. So one of the documents he produces basically shows that Lee Harvey Oswald met with the KGB, and he was with someone named Francisco Tamayo, who is known as El Mexicano. El Mexicano was later captured in Venezuela for attempting to assassinate another individual. This is all stuff that was classified that nobody knew until now. This is all things that the Warren Commission didn't talk about. So, I think what's good to think about as you're thinking about this is go back to the FEMA report on 9/11. That was kind of like the equivalent of the Warren Commission for 9/11, and these are not little omissions. These are huge. Burleson then directs a couple questions to James Morley, who says that he brings up Angleton again and the 3 CIA officers who lied to the Warren Commission, which we know as a result of these newly declassified documents, and how the news media failed to report it, I think probably to this day. Mr. Crane talks about the involvement of a Michael Franchese, who claimed the mob was involved somehow with the Kennedy assassination, and asks if this had something to do with the deal between the Kennedys and the mob and how that deal was, I guess, broken. But he goes on to say that Michael Franchese, who I guess had knowledge of the mob or was in the mob, said that it was common knowledge among crime bosses that their role was to eliminate the witness, Oswald. So the claim there is that the mob was responsible for killing Oswald, not Kennedy. Mr. Crane then brings up the fact that there were 2 assassination attempts against Donald Trump in the last year. Now, this is something everyone should be concerned about. It shouldn't be, oh, well, I hate Trump so much, that's okay. Well, we shouldn't be okay with any assassination attempts against politicians, whether we like them or not. Murder is murder. And so Mr. Crane asks the panel if anyone sees similarities between what has happened to Trump recently, given how little we still know about Thomas Crooks, the guy who tried to shoot Trump and just hit his ear. And the first one to respond is James Morley, and he immediately says no. And I can't help but feel like his very quick response is a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction of his own fear of saying something that may, sound too pro-Trump. And that's just my opinion. Oliver Stone then kind of hesitates for a minute and squirms because you can see, again, I think he can smell when he's trying to be led on how to respond on something. And he overcomes his own, whatever his own bias is, which I assume he's a leftist. I don't know that for sure. But he says, he talks about how surprised he continues to be about how little we still know about Crooks and the other attempt. In other words, both attempts. He says, I would see similarities here. He realizes that the reason he's squirming is because he realizes he has to overcome, the partisan politics, and he has to just be objective, which may make him uncomfortable because, some people might accuse him of, oh, you're pro-Trump or something like that. But it's not a pro-Trump thing to say, to objectively look at this and go, yeah, there's similarities here. It doesn't mean you love Trump. It just means you're looking at the evidence in an unbiased manner and you're trying to solve a crime. You care about solving the crime and getting the criminals. You don't care about, how it's going to look or how it's going to win you political points. In the closing comments, Anna Paulina Luna mentions 3 women who supposedly saw Lee Harvey Oswald in the book depository on the 4th floor, which was not included in the Warren report. I've never heard of this, but again, I'm sure JFK assassination buffs know about this. 2 of the women headed down immediately when they heard the commotion, I guess. And the 3rd woman stayed behind and saw the 2 women go down. All this happened within like 30 seconds. Oswald was supposedly on the 6th floor, so he couldn't have made it down the stairs and ended up where another witness saw him. Basically, this whole story, which was not in the Warren report, which was omitted, contradicts sharply what the report says about where Oswald was and when. So this sounds like a pretty important piece of information. One of these 3 women is still alive. Her name is Sandy Stiles, according to Mr. DiEugenio. And I guess this is in a document called the Stroud document. And finally, Mrs. Luna asks Oliver Stone if he would recommend the release of NBC footage, which shows the motorcade going by and someone who looks like Oswald standing there watching it, which means that he couldn't have been inside the building and shooting Kennedy from where the Warren Commission said he did if he was on the ground next to the motorcade. Oliver Stone says that we don't know this was Oswald, but if we got a hold of the original footage, which NBC has, we could look closer at it and perhaps determine that. And I didn't know about any of this, although Bill Cooper may have mentioned it in one of his lectures. NBC, according to Oliver Stone, has twice refused to release it. So he urges the panel to force them to release it, which seems reasonable enough. Why would they be withholding it? Because, the media covers up. The media is, an arm of the CIA, Operation Mockingbird and all that. DiEugenio ends by saying there were actually 3 attempts on JFK's life in November of the year he died. Once in Chicago and Tampa, and then finally Dallas, where it was successful. He goes on to say that the Chicago attempt was very similar to the Dallas attempt. So this was an operation that was planned and attempted 3 times. That's pretty alarming. I think that right there indicates, the collaboration of many, which that's the definition of a conspiracy. Anyway, at the end of the day, I feel kind of the same way I did before these documents were quote unquote fully released. James Morley says he thinks there's still a few hundred documents that haven't been released that need to. And he emphasizes that he doesn't believe this was a complete release. Fair enough. But this does kind of feel like the church hearings a bit, where, it's great that this is coming out in the open and people are talking about it however many years later, but where's the accountability? Are we ever going to see any accountability? And if there isn't, then this is kind of all for a waste. It's just, they're just pandering to people like me and perhaps DiEugenio and James Morley, people who really want to get to the bottom of it. They're just throwing us a bone, but without the intention of really doing anything. So until we see some accountability, it's hard to know how useful all this really is, other than just reminding us of what we already know. Yeah, your government and your 3-letter agencies are just lying to you and just killing anyone they want, and it's totally above the law. I had one final thought regarding the aspect of this hearing that is trying to highlight the dangers of, releasing information and the casualties of innocent people whose, personal information would get released. It occurred to me while I was editing this that the whole reason they're doing this relates to the Epstein client list and, P. Diddy and all these stories that seem like they're just barely covering up a mountain of evidence of the most heinous crimes and society living right in our country with us that we could ever imagine. And, if you think specifically about the Jeffrey Epstein client list, I mean, how come we don't know who was paying Jeffrey Epstein to go visit his island and abuse, girls, pedophiles? How come we don't know who one single one of these people are? That they have the list. So I think the whole we got to protect the identity of the innocent thing is really code for we need to protect those people who are involved in pedophilia and these criminals who are involved in these huge networks of scumbags running our freaking country. I think it's highly likely that that's the angle that Mr. Davison and everyone else here is coming from when they try to pretend like, we're just concerned about everyday people. No, they're not.